Ken Ham and Brett Beamer, in their book Already Gone, give us the following results of a statistical study. Of 1,020 to 29-year-old evangelicals who attended church regularly but no longer do so, 95% attended during their elementary and middle school years. 55% attended during high school, and only 11% were still going to church during their early college years. This is part 2 in a series about why Christian education. In this series, we are talking about worldly influence on our children outside of school, worldly influence on our children from public education, the results, what has happened and is happening to our kids, why it's happening, and what we can do about it. Before we move on to part 2, let's briefly review part 1. In part 1, worldly influence on our children outside of school, we determined that our children are exposed to excessive amounts of screen time. Studies show that the average kid, 8 to 18 years old, looks at screens over 7.5 hours per day. We also determined that the content on those screens shows ever-increasing amounts of profanity, violence, sexual content, and bullying, not to mention other worldly issues such as homosexuality, social justice warriors, transgenderism, and so forth, that our society is saturated with. Now let's move on to part 2, worldly influence on our children from public education. In 3 Supreme Court cases, religious influence in public schools was essentially eliminated. In 1948, the Supreme Court banned religious instruction by teachers in public schools. In 1962, the Supreme Court decided that prayer in school violated the First Amendment. And in 1963, the court decided that reading the Bible in school also violated the First Amendment. What happened when our country removed prayer from school? Here's a graph of pregnancies to unwed mothers. Notice the jump in pregnancies to unwed mothers. Here's a graph of violent crime indices. Look at the change in the slope of the trend. Here's a graph depicting the SAT scores. Notice the drop in the SAT scores after religious influence was removed. Public schools and their textbooks are pushing worldly values. Biology books teach evolution as fact, not theory. Creation is not even offered as an option. The theory of evolution breaks down when scientists are asked questions. Where are the transition fossils? Most of the mutations in DNA are harmful. Why are there relatively few information-gaining mutations that have been discovered? Where do morals come from? These are some of the known lies that were in my high school biology textbook. Peppered moths. Dead moths were glued onto trees to demonstrate how the moths had evolved to their environment. Haeckel's embryo drawing. Haeckel wanted to support Darwin's theory, even though the evidence showed that the human embryo did not look like a salamander or a pig. That didn't stop him from publishing his drawings. Eventually, he blamed the draftsman for the blunder, but he never did admit that he was the draftsman. This happened in 1874, yet his drawing was still in my high school biology textbook. The Miller-Urey experiment. Their experiment tried to prove that under the right conditions, abiogenesis could occur. Abiogenesis means that life could start from chemicals in the right conditions. Eventually, Miller admitted that abiogenesis was never possible, yet the Miller-Urey experiment is still cited as proof of abiogenesis in textbooks. Essentially, the reason it is still cited is it seems like the best story. My 7th grade Sunday school students are being taught the Big Bang as fact, not theory. Let's break down the essence of the Big Bang theory. This is paraphrased from the European Space Agency's kids website. Everything in the entire universe was inside a bubble that was 1,000 times smaller than a pinhead. That pinhead suddenly exploded, eventually forming the universe as we know it. Everything was inside a bubble that was 1,000 times smaller than a pinhead. Your watch, your cell phone, your car, your house, the United States, the Earth, the Moon, our solar system, our galaxy, including its estimated 100 billion to 400 billion stars, and all of the other galaxies in the universe estimated to be about 100 billion, with their estimated 100 billion to 400 billion stars each. Does this really seem like good scientific fact, or maybe just a theory? And by the way, when you start asking skeptics what caused the Big Bang, or in other words, what made it begin, they don't like to admit there is not a good explanation. A few years ago, alarmists were excited about global warming. Now they are excited about climate change. I've even seen a few articles where the writers are concerned about a coming mini ice age. I can remember reading articles in the Houston Post about the coming ice age in the 1970s. Now man-made climate change is being taught as fact. Al Gore's inconvenient truth is shown by the government and in schools. Notice the comments from the recent Wall Street Journal story. Poor record. Prediction and claims proved all wrong. This is misleading. And low confidence. Titlegate. Climate alarmists caught faking sea level rise. Notice that after the data had been sufficiently adjusted, there was a sharp and dramatic rise in the sea level. Notice also that the adjustments were called highly questionable and suspicious. Here's the summary and conclusion page of a study concerning the adjustment of data for climate change. The conclusive finds show that adjusted GAST data sets are not a valid representation of reality. In fact, they are totally inconsistent with published and credible U.S. and other temperature data. The reason being, the naturally occurring cycles were removed from the data. If climate change is such good science, why do scientists have to manipulate the data beyond what is accepted practice by their fellow scientists? And do we really want our kids to be taught that kind of science? None of this information slowed the Portland Public School Board from declaring global warming as fact. I'm sure that the Portland Public School Board is loaded with expert scientists that is qualified to declare global warming as fact. Textbooks are pushing worldly values. Not only are homosexual and transgender life choices accepted as the new normal, but these viewpoints are being forced upon children who are a captive audience. It's Elementary is a training book for teachers. The purpose of this book is to train teachers to make LBGT a normalized thing in the minds of our kids. Here's an example of a math and science training page. They want to make sure that the math word problems are LBGT inclusive. Who's in a Family is a book targeted to first and second graders. This book is on the Common Core recommended reading list. According to the author, Robert Skolch, the purpose of the book was to get the subject of same-sex parent households into the minds of children before they are old enough to have been convinced that there is another way of looking at life. Notice Laura and Kyle live with their two moms. Robin has her dad and her dad's partner Henry. In Texas, the Birdville Independent School District had to discipline a teacher for giving their sixth graders a questionnaire. The survey had questions such as, a friend invites you to a gay bar, and your sister invites her new boyfriend to dinner. He is a female-to-male transsexual. Let's move to right here in Oklahoma. This is a school assignment that was given to 12-year-old sixth graders in the middle school in Jay, Oklahoma. Does this really look age appropriate? Do our sixth graders really need to be able to define mutual masturbation, oral sex, vaginal sex, and anal sex? The public education system is social engineering our society through our children. In the final video in this three-part series, we will see the results of this social engineering, why it's happening, and what we can do about it as Christian parents. In January 28, 2017 article for the New York Times Sunday Review, Adam Bear and Joshua Knobe summarized the results of a paper they had written for the journal Cognition. They said our work thus offers support for those who worry about normalization, that things simply by becoming more common become more acceptable. The same holds true for gay marriage or gender reassignment surgery or any other controversial institution or practice that becomes more widespread.